Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our safety connection this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I know there's always a million things going on, so we certainly appreciate you taking the time to log in this morning and get some information. So my name is Christy Cork. I am a specialized consultant for healthy workplaces at WSPS. I'm located down in St. Thomas, Ontario, so just south of London. Um, and a little bit about me. I don't know, I've done a few safety connections before. I'm not sure if anybody's joined into those or not. But my background is automotive manufacturing and healthcare. So doing health and safety, and then started at WSPS just over 5 years ago as a consultant. So what we're going to be talking about today is kind of a different topic for WSPS or the health and safety realm, talking about a trauma-informed workplace as it relates to psychological health and safety. So if you read the session description for today, you'll see we're tying in sort of that trauma-informed approach when dealing with workplace violence and harassment, de-escalation, but really starting to make that connection between how to approach different topics in the workplace and create psychological safety to help foster that trauma-informed approach. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully that's what everybody thinks they signed up for. But before we get into the content, the session is being recorded because we do make these available after once we're sort of done running the live versions. So it will be available. I know there's going to be questions like, can we have the presentation and all of those things? So do know that eventually you can access the recorded version of this presentation. It does take some time because it has to go through, getting AODA approved and all of those types of things, but it will be available. And we are not just going to email you the PowerPoint. So you don't have to ask that question. Just I'm getting ahead of that one. Okay, so before we get started, we want to make this as seamless an experience for the next sort of hour and a half as possible. We do recommend using computer audio. I will be having the chat up on the right hand side, so feel free to chime in using that chat at any time. Because we have a pretty large group, the cameras and microphones have been disabled for all participants. Otherwise, there's just too much background noise. It's very distracting. So we're going to use the chat to communicate. There's also going to be some poll questions, and we'll get into that in a second. We do recommend muting sort of other devices and apps just to minimize distractions. Now, the chat, if you have that open, I will keep an eye on it over on the sort of right-hand side of my screen. And please ask questions, chime in throughout the session today. I'll try and stay focused on the content of the presentation, but if I see some questions or recurring themes popping up in the chat, I might pause to address those. Otherwise, I will go back at the end of the session and take a look at all those questions that came in the chat, if there are any. And certainly I'll leave time for some Q&A at the end. So feel free to chime in the chat, ask some questions, and I promise we will get to those throughout the session. All right, lots of people coming in now. All right. So you can enable a full screen view of the presentation. You can go to sort of those three dots where it says more at the top of your screen on that banner bar, and adjust some of those settings, such as move to full screen if you find that the presentation text is too small. But know that that can minimize your ability to participate in some other functions. So just, you can toggle back and forth, whatever suits your needs. And then polls. There will be a few different polls throughout the session, two different types. So certainly sort of that multiple choice poll. And then we also have a word cloud poll that we're going to be trying out for the first time. So bear with us. But yeah, the more you can participate in those polls, the better, right? We like to get some feedback and engagement. And do know that all of the polls are anonymous. We don't know who is saying what. So hopefully everybody feels comfortable participating in those. Okay. So getting into our content today, we are going to be covering, so first we'll talk about the goals of our safety connection. We do these, they're all the time. I know there was a safety connection yesterday. I think there's maybe a different one tomorrow. So all different topics really are just free sort of information sessions to try and, give people up-to-date current information on health and safety in the province of Ontario, connect virtually with different peers, you get to attend from the comfort of whether you have a home office or you're in the workplace right now. And certainly just best practices, right? A lot of different topics, different ideas. Hopefully, the topics are meeting your needs, but certainly if you're looking for a safety connection on a topic that we haven't offered or don't have available, we would love to hear from you. We'd like to know what else you want to know about or how you're finding even this presentation going at the end, because we do have 2 more of these scheduled. So if there's things that you'd like to see or you were hoping it covered something and maybe you didn't hear about that, please let us know, because we're always trying to, make improvements on these safety connections and making sure that they're good use of your time, right? Again, we're all busy. We don't want to sit through something if it's not value add. So what we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about the state of workplace violence and harassment in Canada. What's going on? What are we seeing? What are some of the trends, contributing factors, sort of that why behind we're even having this conversation today? Then we're going to get into how can we prevent workplace violence and harassment by focusing on psychological safety. And those two things may seem like a connection, or maybe you're thinking, well, how can we prevent workplace violence with customers and things like that? But we're going to sort of make those connections and really talk about what is psychological health and safety and how can we leverage psychological health and safety through that trauma-informed approach to reduce conflict, reduce incidents of violence, and really keep people psychologically safe at work. We'll talk about what is this trauma-informed approach. We keep using that word trauma, but what is it really, right? What isn't it? How do we make sure we're, still holding people accountable with safe work practices, appropriate workplace behaviors, but approaching it through that lens of understanding and care and concern, as opposed to just maybe thinking if people react a certain way that they're a bad person. That's probably not the case. They're reacting for a reason. We're going to talk about that. We're going to look at different de-escalation strategies when someone is in that sort of fight, flight, freeze response, and they're, what can we do? How do we talk to them? What different skills can we leverage to help de-escalate those individuals? And then what does a post-incident response look like? And we'll have some resources at the end and certainly some time for Q&A. Okay, so I'm gonna keep chugging along here, but again, feel free to chime in the chat. I've got Emily helping me out from WSPS in the background. So if you're having any technical issues or something's not working for you, again, use that chat feature just to let us know how things are going, or if you have any questions, comments, and concerns. So to get this kicked off, our first poll question is, I want to know what you think. What is your experience in your workplace? Do you think that there's an increase in uncivil or disrespectful behaviors, whether that is between coworkers and colleagues, or maybe from the people that you serve, depending on the type of work that you do, whether that's customers, clients, patients? Let us know what's going on. Ooh, wow. Okay. You will give it a few more minutes. I still see some responses popping in here. Okay. Yeah. So the overwhelming majority is saying yes. A few yeses. Yes. Ben and Brenda. Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. And that is what we're seeing. That's what studies are showing. That's what we're hearing when we go into workplaces across the province, is that this is increasing. We're less civil, maybe less respectful. Maybe we're on the receiving end of some harassment, violence from customers, from coworkers, from colleagues, maybe from managers. So what is going on? I see Tim saying no, that's not your experience. Okay, fair enough. Um, why do you think this is happening? Just to back up, I think what everybody in the session this morning is saying and experiencing, or is at least perceiving to be true, that there is this increase. In 2022, a survey was done. It was a collaboration between Western University, the University of Toronto, and the Canadian Labour Congress. And the respondents, so 5,000 respondents across all different sectors, indicated, over 70% indicated that they have experienced at least one incident of workplace violence and harassment in the past 2 years. So that's between 2020 and 2022. 70%. I mean, I knew there was an increase. I certainly know that this is a problem, but I didn't realize the prevalence or that many workers, 70% had experienced at least one incident of workplace violence and harassment in the last 2 years. That's a lot. That's really, really high. And we know, even with the Ministry of Labor training and skills development, immigration and skills development, that they're also seeing this as a priority, an area of concern, that there is an increase, and certainly focusing on whether that's work-related mental harm prevention or workplace violence and harassment certainly is one of the sort of top two themes and priorities that they have for sort of the next planning process. So this is across sectors. I think that's important to recognize. I think it's really easy to sort of say, oh yeah, like the service sector or retail, hospitality, where there is more interaction with the public, maybe healthcare, education. I don't know what sector everybody is in. I'm kind of curious, but maybe even in the chat, let me know what sort of sector are you in and where we're seeing this increase. But this is across sectors. This is in manufacturing. This may be between colleagues and coworkers. This may be, in other sectors, maybe construction, maybe agriculture. We have so many different respondents and so many different aspects of work that there's no work environment as long as you have people working together or serving the public or other people that we're going to have it. This is going to be a risk factor for you. All right. Thanks, Vicky. Automotive, and we've got agriculture. Okay. So the data showed that third party and coworkers were the most common perpetrators of workplace violence. And I do think, and I'm going to speak to sort of something that Ben's chiming in the chat a little bit, is workplace violence and harassment is underreported. That is a fact. So maybe in this anonymous survey, people were very comfortable to say, oh yeah, like I've experienced harassment or bullying or workplace violence. But I would be surprised if all of those incidents were reported to the employer, right? Following the appropriate reporting mechanisms. We know for a lot of reasons that people don't feel safe reporting, especially incidents of sort of harassment or bullying in the workplace, because maybe they feel that that's going to be career limiting. It's not safe. It's going to put a target on their back. So we know that while that 70% may absolutely be true, I'm also guessing that, if we talk to people in HR or management, that they're not seeing 70% of workers reporting incidents of violence and harassment. So we have a huge disconnect, and that's also a problem that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So some other sectors, thank you for everybody chiming in. We've got, I feel like almost every sector represented on the call today, which is amazing. We've got waste disposal, hospitality, education, manufacturing, recreation, construction, not-for-profit, hospitality. It's fantastic. Thank you, everybody. So some other studies across the board indicated that not only are we seeing an increase in incidents, but in severity and frequency, and there's an increased fear to report or fear of retaliation, and also new harasser tactics was something that was reported. And I think we have to understand that the nature of work, how we interact is changing for a lot of people, whether that's because we have remote work environments, we have different ways of working. So some of those harasser tactics can be now virtual or online, cyberbullying, things like that. But this increased fear to report and retaliation, I also feel like that's something that we need to talk about. We're going to get into why that might be happening in a couple of slides. So what is going on? Okay, so I did some research, right? And not just talking to, some of the workplaces that I help do consulting with or that I'm visiting, but also, different studies. Since COVID, even before, we're just seeing an increased prevalence, but there's a lot of stuff going on. And I believe that sort of the increased level of stress is huge. We all live with sort of a level of normal stress, and hopefully on a day-to-day basis, we can cope with those stressors. But with things that are going on right now in our lives, like whether it's financial stress, right? A lot of people are certainly feeling that burden of financial stress every time they put gas in the car or have to pay their rent or energy bills, feed their families. Like things are just really expensive. So there can be like sort of that underlying, financial stress, there's relationship stresses, there's sort of some global stresses with things going on in the world, whether that is conflicts, politics, all of those things that are very, very polarizing. So there's generally just a lot going on. And when we're already at sort of this heightened level of stress that we're living with on a day-to-day basis, that's going to start impacting us in many different ways, right? Maybe we're getting less sleep, right? Maybe we're already on sort of that stress bubble, and a few more stressors kind of cause us to react in a way that maybe we normally wouldn't have. Some of the other things that are on here, I, put normalizing sort of the policing of others. And you let me know what you think about this, but I think that is a factor. More and more since COVID, we were told, oh, you know what, if your neighbor's got more than like 2 or 3 cars in the driveway, they're breaking the rules. They're not helping to flatten the curb. Someone's not wearing their PPE or their respirator properly. Or we judged people based on, whether they were getting the COVID vaccine or not, or how they were responding to that pandemic. And we've sort of started judging people and normalizing that, like almost making it okay or encouraging it. And I think that's carried on, right? I think we're more comfortable now telling people when we don't agree or we think they're wrong or doing something wrong. And I think that normalization of policing others, whether it's our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, our family, is really causing an increased level of conflict. Yeah, I agree, Tim. I'm with you. I feel like that didn't normally be like, ooh, I don't agree with that, but I'm not going to say anything. And I think now we're sort of getting more comfortable confronting people, more conflict. Some other things that are up here. I put fighting for rights and freedoms. I do think, and I don't know if I actually do. I think it's a thing. I think that when we started to feel like there was a lack of control, when people were telling us what to do, how to live, when we went to the grocery store, we had to wait in line, we had to mask, we couldn't buy certain things or it was limited, right? A lot of aspects of our lives, we lost control over aspects of our life that we normally had control over, right? And that was hard, right? It's hard to lose that control or to feel like we're losing that control, even if it was with the best of intentions, still doesn't make that easy. And some other things around fighting for rights and freedoms, like just feeling like, not that we're victims, but things are happening to us. And sort of not being okay with that, right? And I'm not saying that's bad, good or bad, but it does add to sort of this constant conflict and feeling like we're a victim. There's fear. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well, because fear is interesting. It is okay to be scared. It is a normal response to a perceived threat. We feel fear. But what is happening is sometimes, and for whatever reason, it's often not okay to express fear or to express sadness or vulnerability that we're afraid. So what happens is that fear, the emotional sort of outlet for that is anger. So for whatever reason, it is more socially acceptable to be angry than to express fear and sadness and vulnerability. So I want everybody to remember that for a second, because I think there's lots of times when we're trying to de-escalate someone or there's increased tension, conflict, incidents of workplace violence, and I would wager a guess that sometimes that those behaviors or reactions are because someone is actually scared. Maybe they're fearful of losing their employment, right? Maybe there's not a lack of job security at a workplace. Maybe people are scared that, again, they have a loss of control over a situation. And instead of expressing that in a constructive way, people express that as anger. Right. And sometimes when there is a lot on the line, when people are, are struggling to be vulnerable and really properly articulate how they're feeling or what their experience is, it comes across as anger. So I just want everyone to remember that as well. So some of these other ones, sort of this reliance on technology, maybe less sort of face-to-face interactions, right? Maybe we've lost some of those skills on how to talk to and converse with people effectively. I've already touched on polarization of issues, this sort of me first society where I do think we've got a little bit maybe more selfish. um, generally. Okay, I want everyone to imagine that we're going on a field trip to Costco. Okay. And I'll be honest, Costco for me is actually, I don't go anymore because I don't cope well at Costco. And there's a lot of reasons. But I think this me first society and this selfishness displays itself at Costco perfectly. You have a total lack of any sort of social norms when it comes to navigating your way through that store. And people are just cutting each other off. There's, I just don't get it. But I think it can absolutely bring out the worst in everything. I'm not trying to bash Costco, and I apologize if anybody here works at Costco. But I do think I don't know why it is. It's like because there's lineups, because I don't know what it is. But people walk into Costco and it's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of here for myself. I'm not going to let other people in. We're going to make lines that totally shut off aisles and people can't walk through the store. Anyway, there's just this sort of lack of social responsibility, right? Or being kind to each other doesn't really exist in all of those instances. Yeah. Yes, Andre, I'm with you. Like there's just sort of a lack of decency. And I actually think, it's not just Costco. It's other instances. I can remember being very, very pregnant, like 8 months pregnant, and it was cold out, and I went to ride the TTC in Toronto, and I was going from like Yonge and Eglinton down to like Union Station for work, and I was very, very pregnant. And I remember standing there, and it was probably a good like 10 minutes before anybody even offered or looked up or acknowledged that maybe I'd be more comfortable sitting down. And I'm not saying that everybody is bad. I'm just saying, like, we're not paying attention to each other. We're not doing what we can to make other people more comfortable or, showing some concern for each other. It's just a very selfish, sort of me first mentality, I feel like, at the moment. So let's make the connection here. Because of all of these stressors that I just mentioned and all of these things going on, and the reason that we're seeing increases in uncivil, disrespectful behavior, maybe work-life balance is struggling, we're struggling to cope with some of even the normal stresses of life, leaving people in a constant state of alertness to perceived threats. Right. So, I almost refer to it as like stressor stacking, right? Where we've got all of these different stressors that happen to us throughout the day, throughout our lives, throughout the week. And eventually we get to a point where we can no longer effectively cope with those stressors. So I'm sure you can think of a day, right? Where you woke up and maybe you didn't get a great sleep and you're already a little bit tired. And then the dog throws up on your bed, right? And then your car doesn't start, or you've got a flat tire, and then the kids are grumpy and fighting with each other, and then someone cuts you off on the way to work. And then you get to work and realize your coworker is called in sick. So now you've got twice the amount of work, right? Like we're adding all of these things on and we can only take so much, right? So at some point, the more stress we have and the more we're living with this high level of perceived stress, the less likely we might be able to cope and manage our responses and actually respond to a situation instead of react, because that's what happens, right? There's a big difference between reacting and responding. When our fight, flight, freeze response kicks in because there's a perceived threat, we react, right? Whether that's out of fear, trying to keep us safe, we react, and maybe we do things or say things that we're not proud of after the fact because we actually didn't have a lot of control in that moment over that reaction. We all do this, right? So none of us are immune. None of us have perfect emotional regulation where we respond every time and have control over what we do. There are people, I'm sure, that get road rage from time to time, right? And you might use some hand gestures, lay on the horn, cut people off because you perceived a threat, right? And so your fight, flight, freeze response kicks in. Okay. Improving psychological health and safety at work can create this less threatening environment. So I want to think about this for a second. And um, so psychological health and safety is not workplace wellness and well-being initiatives. I want everybody to remember that for a second. Psychological health and safety is not having an employee and family assistance program or doing lunchtime yoga or having a policy. Okay, we're going to talk about what psychological health and safety is in a second, but I just want to get that in your mind. Like, we are being proactive. We're reducing the risk of harm in the workplace. That is what psychological health and safety is. So when we have a psychologically safe work environment and we're careful and we're considerate in how we treat each other, how we organize work, how we manage people, it creates a sense of safety to either put your hand up and say when you're not okay, to report a concern, to ask for help, to ask a question, right? That is psychological safety. So it allows people to respond more effectively because they're not always in fear that, asking for help or saying when they're not okay is going to be career limiting. Okay. So, workplaces that strive to provide psychological protection encourage workers to ask for help. You want to know when someone's not okay. And I'm going to relate this actually back to I want to talk about like ergonomics for a second, because I feel like psychological health and safety is a little bit like where ergonomics was maybe 10, 15 years ago. And we now want employees to report early if they are starting to get, a sore back or shoulder pain or wrist pain, any of those things. We want workers to report early to let us know when they're experiencing harm or when things are not okay so that we can make adjustments, right? So that they don't experience long-term consequences that are more difficult to recover from. We want employees to tell us when they're not okay and when they need help. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And yes, I get that for everybody that might be like, I don't know if I want everybody telling me when they're struggling, when they're struggling to cope. Um, but I promise that just like being there and being able to listen, and if people do have that sense of psychological safety and protection in the workplace, that it will minimize some threatening situations that exist because they have an outlet, they have someone they can talk to, and honestly sometimes that's all it takes, right, for someone to be able to cope with some stressors is to just talk to someone, right? And if that exists in the workplace, then there is that direct connection to minimizing those harms. So I want to know, what has your workplace done to improve, or anything, what has your workplace done regarding psychological health and safety? Um, you can go, and again, this is anonymous, so this is the word cloud. So again, don't write sentences here, but give me like a few things. You can, I think, have sort of multiple answers. It's going to take a second for it to come up. But let me know, like, what is your workplace doing? Have you started thinking about this? Are there steps that you're taking to sort of protect workers' mental health? Let me know. And then maybe we'll be able to get a look at this word cloud that we're generating. Is there a way I can, what does this look like? Can everybody see the word cloud? I had to click on it in the chat where it said the responses. Are you able to react? Can someone give me a thumbs up if you're able to see the word cloud? Maybe not. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Natasha, Vicky, Holly. I appreciate it. Love the thumbs. Okay, maybe there's just a little bit of a delay. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got some procedures. We've got debriefs. Love that. Some employee engagement, training, rotations, trusting relationships. Yes, honesty and humility. Awesome. Health first aiders. Maybe that's mental health first aid. That's awesome. Okay. Peer support. Yes, that's so good. Open is the number one word. I feel like there's, picking up some of the key words here. Open door policy. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Thank you everyone for chiming in on that. Support networks, lots of different supports. It's fantastic. Trauma assist, amazing. Okay. I'll close that for a second. So the reason we ask that question, right, is again, we're trying to make that connection between having that trauma-informed approach, supporting workers, having that psychologically safe work environment. Because, if we don't have that concept of psychological health and safety, it's going to be very difficult when it comes to that trauma-informed approach for workers to feel safe, supported. Again, like it's okay to ask questions, ask for help, all of those things. So this slide here, and you'll notice that the definition of psychological safety is from the CSA standard. So there's a CSA standard for psychological health and safety in the workplace in Canada, and we know what CSA standards are, right? There's standards for all sorts of things like respirator fit testing, machine guarding, PPE, all sorts of things. But there's also one for psychological health and safety, and it's called CSA Z1003, and it's still a free download. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. You can go and grab that. But essentially, what the goal of that standard is to be proactive and intentional in what we're doing to reduce the risk of mental harm for workers. So you can see on the left-hand side that little image that shows shifting the culture from harm to care. Like essentially what we want to do is take baby steps, right, to move towards that culture of carefulness to avoid mental injury. And, I'm a health and safety professional. I'm not a mental health professional. And I think when we start to integrate those concepts of psychological health and safety with our existing health and safety systems, that's where we're going to see the biggest sort of bang for our buck, right? To really make a difference, because you already have amazing safety programs in place. You already have joint health and safety committees. You already have inspections, investigations, training. You're doing so many things for physical health and safety. If we can just start integrating psychological safety into that, you don't have to create anything new, right? It's just modifying what you already have. Then we'll start shifting from a culture of harm to care, right? And it's not going to be because we got lucky and all of those things, but we have systems in place that we can always lean back on. Okay. All right. So making the connection here with psychological safety. So some ways that a psychologically unsafe workplace can increase the risk and severity of workplace violence and harassment. So if we normalize toxic behaviors, this happens. I can't tell you how many times, and I've had it where I've worked in organizations where there's someone that has terrible behaviors, is unkind, is mean, is almost known to be a bully, but everyone says, oh, that's just the way they are, like it's not personal. And everybody else sort of tiptoes around these individuals, trying not to poke the bear instead of actually holding that person accountable for those behaviors. Right. So when we have psychologically unsafe work environments, we normalize some of those behaviors. And maybe it starts at the top, right? Where we have, lack of work-life balance, we have unmanageable workload, we have no recognition and reward, those types of things. And when we normalize those behaviors that can cause harm for other people or make it okay because, certain levels of management are displaying those behaviors, then that's unsafe, right? That causes harm. If there's a lack of trust and respect, and I do see a comment in the chat, I'm going to hang on to that for a second and get to it maybe at the end. If there's a lack of trust and respect, right? If we don't trust our leaders, if we don't trust each other, that we have each other's best interest in mind and that we want each other to succeed and be successful, then we're not going to share. It's not okay to ask for help, right? If there's a power imbalance and abuse, right? So if we take advantage, people in, positions of power sort of take advantage of that and are inconsiderate of how their management style of what they're asking for could cause harm. Maybe their communication strategies are ineffective and potentially harmful. If there's a lack of job security, okay, this is huge. When organizations start to feel the crunch, and maybe it's been announced that there's some impending layoffs coming, we get into this type of environment in the workplace where it gets competitive and people are willing to throw each other under the bus to make themselves look better because they think that that will help ensure their job security. And we blame each other and everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else instead of having personal accountability and taking responsibility for our actions or mistakes or if we did something. That lack of job security is so damaging, not just because it increases the risk of workplace violence and harassment, but it's psychologically unsafe, right? And when I say psychologically unsafe, like, okay, let me maybe back up for a second. Um, and I apologize if some of you that have been here have heard me use this analogy in the past in other sessions, but I think it's so important to help sort of demonstrate what psychological safety actually is and what it isn't. So I used to work in automotive manufacturing, and we made big truck frames. Okay, so it was a huge, huge facility, very heavy parts. And let's just say that at this facility, we had an operator that had to lift a 50-pound rail, a side rail for this frame. They had to lift that 50-pound rail every 37 seconds and load it into the tooling. So they're lifting from floor to waist, carrying that side rail, loading it into the part so that the robot can come pick it up and move it to the next station. Every 37 seconds, they have to do that. You can imagine what would happen over time, right? People started getting injured, neck injuries, back injuries, wrist, elbow, shoulder, you name it. People were getting injured because that's very physically demanding work. And as a responsible employer, what we didn't say was, hey, everybody needs to go to the gym. You need to get a little bit more physically resilient, physically stronger, so that you can continue to do this work without getting hurt. We didn't say that. We said, hey, let's change how people interact with the environment. Let's change how they do this work. So we got a lift assist. We got rollers. They didn't have to carry it. We got a lift tilt bins. They didn't have to lift all the way down to the floor. We changed how people interacted with that work so that it didn't hurt them. What happens with psychological safety, and this happens in all workplaces, is if someone's struggling, maybe they're experiencing high levels of stress, distress, burnout, they're struggling to cope, the workplace says, oh, hey, we've got an EFAP program, right? Like here's the EFAP card, or go talk to someone, go take care of that, go deal with that, and then come back and work in the exact same environment that caused harm in the first place. We put the entire burden to deal with that stressor, with that aspect of work that's causing harm on the worker. Instead, that's like saying, oh, if you get hurt at work, no problem, like we'll pay for the medical bill or the physiotherapy. But we don't say, hey, let's actually think about what we could do differently to prevent harm in the first place. That's why we do inspections and investigations, and we do all of these things, right, to minimize the risk of injury. It's why we have all different controls already in place in workplaces. So we need to sort of look at psychological safety through a similar lens and say, hey, let's identify our hazards. Let's think about what are the aspects of working in our workplace that could contribute to mental harm, and what can we do proactively to minimize that risk. It's not saying that every single workplace is going to be 100% free from any type of mental harm, but it's saying we're going to try. We're going to be proactive. We're going to try to keep this safer. So when you think about for physical health and safety, the millions and millions of dollars that organizations spend to help ensure physical safety, whether, that's investment in time for your joint health and safety committee, for training, all the training that you do for workers, PPE, identifying pedestrian walkways, inspections, pre-use inspections, all of those things. Like the list goes on and on of everything that workplaces do to keep people physically safe. Just think about for a second, if we started to approach psychological safety through a similar lens and said, hey, what if we invest in actually doing things differently? In changing how we manage people, how we organize work, right? And we actually start thinking about what are the hazards? What are the things that when people go home at the end of the day, that's causing them to be short with their significant other or their spouse, or keeping them up at night because they can't they can't sleep because they've got this to-do list, or they had very difficult interactions and conversations and they're losing sleep, or they have to sit in their car in the morning and give themselves a pep talk to just be able to cope and deal with what that day might bring, because there's some anxiety there. Like if we start to think about how can we reduce that risk, right, then we can really make a difference for people. Maybe I'm gonna read this question here in the chat because I think it relates to sort of what we've just been talking about, and then we'll keep going on the trauma-informed approach. Okay, I'm gonna read the question. How do we approach scenarios with workers or employees when they weaponize psychological safety? For example, if they are invited to a meeting to have a discussion about performance concern or a discussion around feedback on behavior in the workplace, and leadership is approaching from a supportive and growth perspective, but the employee claims that being invited to attend the meeting and engaging in these types of conversations is a hazard and harmful to their psychological safety. Okay. I understand where you're coming from, that people are saying, oh no, like I can't have hard or difficult conversations because that's detrimental to my physical or mental well-being. Um, First of all, I want to acknowledge that that is likely the minority of people, and we are allowed to coach and performance manage and do those things and hold people accountable for inappropriate behaviors in the workplace. Of course, if that's being done carefully and out of care and concern and trying to ensure the success of that worker, and people are still sort of saying that, yep, having a difficult conversation is detrimental to my psychological safety, I'd be curious. And maybe what's interesting is actually looking at, when are you're approaching it from a supportive and growth perspective, but maybe we need to ask employees how they like to receive feedback. Because sometimes what happens is if there is sort of a performance management conversation or if someone's getting a discipline or a coaching, sometimes the manager likes to have a witness or someone from HR or something like that, and it can immediately make someone feel like they are being bullied, not bullied, but like ganged up on, or that it's two against one. And especially if we already have sort of that victim mentality going into those conversations, I think having a culture that's based on trust, like this really speaks to organizational culture to me, right? Where people feel like that they are being victimized in some way. But anyway, I'll leave my email address at the end. And if you want to talk about this a little bit more, we certainly can. But I also do think that this is likely the minority of people that would say, oh, it's harmful to my psychological safety, because that truly isn't what psychological safety is, right? Like there are difficult situations, and we're going to talk about this in a second. And that word trigger, I try to avoid using it in certain instances, but there certainly are triggers, right, that harm people's mental health, and especially if they have past trauma. So we don't know, but I think asking this individual a question about like, okay, well, how can we facilitate this conversation that would feel safe to you? And if they're like, no, I just don't want to get feedback or I don't want to be coached, well, that's a problem, right? But if they say, yeah, you know what, like I need to do this like without the door closed, or I need a little bit of notice or a little bit of context so I can mentally prepare. Like maybe there are certain things that they are looking for because they've had really negative experiences in the past, or there isn't that sense of safety and trust. So again, asking them what they would need around that discussion or how to have that discussion could be part of the solution as well. So a trauma-informed approach. Okay, so when people are going to react to a perceived threat through a fight, flight, freeze response, that is just a fact, right? When our bodies perceive, our minds perceive that there is a threat, our autonomic nervous system is going to start kicking in. It's instinctual. We may not have a lot of control over our reactions or how we're responding in that moment. So we need to understand that people with past traumas are going to react in ways that maybe seem disproportionate to us, right? And maybe we haven't had the same lived experience. And it's really easy for us to judge and say, oh my gosh, like that person is just overreacting. But sometimes we need to consider that maybe they do have a past trauma. I'm going to give you an example. When I worked in healthcare, Um, we had, obviously there was an emergency department in the hospital, right? And that was one of our sort of top areas where the admitting clerk was on the receiving end of some very, inappropriate comments, conduct, some violence. Like it was a difficult position, right? Because they were the first point of contact when people that had been waiting for so long were going up and sort of asking when are they going to get seen, feeling like they've been forgotten about, all of those things. But what's important to remember when people are in an emergency department waiting room, and this applies to other situations as well, first of all, they're not at their finest. They're already at sort of that heightened perceived threat stress level. Nobody wants to be in an emergency department waiting room, right? But beyond that, beyond just it's uncomfortable, it's hard, it's a little bit scary, there may be some individuals that actually have past trauma in that environment, whether they lost a loved one or a very traumatic event coming to get healthcare in an emergency department. So having to wait or certain things about that environment might actually trigger a response that is disproportionate to us. Like, it doesn't seem reasonable, but they might not have control over that depending on that past trauma. And they are doing what they need to do and reacting in a way that their body is telling them to respond to that threat. So if they are, say, fight, some people just walk out, they leave because they can't manage that environment and that's just overwhelming for them. And we've seen that, right? People that need healthcare but can't continue to wait in an emergency room because of whatever experience or past trauma they may have, they just leave. That's flee. Some people fight, right? Some people are going to go up to that admitting clerk and express their displeasure, and they're probably scared. But again, that comes across as anger because that's often how we express ourselves, even though that's not the underlying emotion. Um, so again, we just need to really understand, and it doesn't make those behaviors okay. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is it's not an excuse, but we need to have some understanding of why people might respond in these disproportionate ways and learn how to manage that and support those people safely. And it's not a pass, right? We can't put people at risk. It is not okay to get yelled at, abused in the workplace. But we need to understand what that underlying emotion is, or the underlying threat or reason for that action, so that we can effectively de-escalate. So I've got the definition of trauma up here. And I think, sometimes we might overuse that definition of trauma and say, oh my gosh, that's so traumatizing, when it's actually not a real trauma. And a trauma-informed approach involves sort of that prevention piece, de-escalation, and how we're going to respond. So again, it's not a pass to allow for inappropriate, disrespectful, or unsafe behaviors in the workplace. That's not what this is about. People can be held accountable, people can be performance managed, but it does come with a level of understanding, because at the end of the day, we're trying to keep everybody safe, especially in that spirit of workplace violence and harassment prevention. We want to keep people safe. So how we de-escalate someone that has a past trauma might be different than other individuals, right? Depending on the situation. So, oops, did I miss a slide here? What's happening? Oh my gosh, where's number 19? Okay, so a trauma-informed approach to prevention is around building trust, understanding triggers or situations that can increase the likelihood of re-traumatization. When we talk about triggers, it's not just an unpleasant or annoying situation. And I think sometimes, again, that word trigger gets overused. What a trigger really is it is increasing the likelihood of re-traumatization. It is not just, oh, uncomfortable. Like, again, maybe someone in a performance management meeting is saying, oh, I know this is triggering. Well, if there was a past trauma associated with that, possibly, but we need to have that sense of psychological safety. And if we can build trust, like I think about it in the same way as with physical impairment or physical limitations or restrictions. We accommodate for that, right? In workplaces, we want to know if someone, like, let's say, has a lifting restriction and they can't lift more than 15 pounds floor to waist. We accommodate for that because we don't want to risk re-injuring that individual, and we want to support their recovery. I want you to try and think about it in a similar vein, where if someone has a past trauma and there are going to be conditions or things going on in the workplace that can re-traumatize that, that's like re-injuring that same injury, right? It would be similar to that physical, when we need those physical accommodations. So I just want you to think about it in that vein. And again, if someone's not willing to share, or you don't know what that trauma was, and you're not psychiatrist or psychologist, and I'm not suggesting that you should be, but understand, if someone says that, when you send me an email with no context that says we need to talk tomorrow morning, and they tell you, that's upsetting for me, and I think about that all night because I don't know the context, and at a previous employer, like, that happened, and then the next day I was let go, and I really just need you to give me some context, or don't send the email, or come and talk to me right away, because that might be very upsetting for someone, right? And if you have that relationship where they say, this is how I need to be, like, how to communicate so that I don't lose sleep at night and it doesn't cause unnecessary stress, then we'd be respectful of that. There is something called a psychologically safe interactions workshop, and that's available through the Workplace Strategies for Mental Health website. And I have the link at the end, so hang tight. And it's free, and it really just allows people and teams to work together to come up with, how are we going to treat each other? How are we going to address conflict? What is green light, red light as far as behaviors, interactions, words, how we, are going to communicate and interact so that we can do it in a spirit of psychological safety. And don't judge others based on their reaction to a stress. Like, I understand that it may not be how we respond or how we would like other people to respond, because it's maybe not a perceived threat to you, but that does not make you morally superior, right? We may respond to other threats or other things in different ways, or we just don't have that trauma. Like, it's not fair to judge other people because of some of their past life experiences. And yes, it is a shared responsibility, right? Like, people, just like with physical injuries or illnesses, they have to take some of that responsibility to be well and to get well and better, and whether that's physiotherapy or doing rehabilitation, taking care of themselves, of course, right? We want that shared responsibility, and the workplace has a responsibility to not hurt people, right? So it certainly is that shared responsibility, but we need to be talking, we need to be communicating and not judging each other. So this next poll question is kind of fun. I want to know, I don't know why I keep skipping ahead. I want to know if you like roller coasters. Like, yes, I love them all the time. Put me on the front of the Leviathan, the faster, the higher, the better, or no, absolutely not, hard pass. Or depends. Sometimes, like, I'm kind of a sometimes, to be honest. Like, I'll go on some of them with my kids if they need someone to sit with them, but I really don't enjoy it. Like, it's scary. It's, my stomach starts getting butterflies, all of those things. Oh, wow. Okay. So we have a pretty good split here. We've got about 25% of us are absolutely not. Hard pass. You are not dragging me on one of those monster roller coasters no matter what. And then we've got, a good chunk of people that are like, yes, sign me up. I love it. I love all the things. And then we've got some that are kind of in the middle. Okay. So why am I asking you this question? Well, the stressor is the same when it comes to roller coasters, right? Like, let's look at that picture on the screen right now of this white roller coaster and people are going upside down. I don't even know where this is. That stressor is the same. The roller coaster doesn't change for any of us, whether we love it or we hate it. That stressor is exactly the same, but we all respond to that perceived stress in different ways, right? So if you love roller coasters, you're like, yes, running up there, getting at the front, like super excited, your adrenaline's going. Of course, it can still be a little bit scary, but it's a good scary. You love the thrill, something that's, sort of dangerous. It's all good. Then there's a good chunk of us that are like, absolutely not. You cannot drag me on there. And if someone did force someone that is terrified and looks at that roller coaster as a huge threat to their safety, and their body is telling them, like, no, 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 don't go on this. Their hands are getting clammy and sweaty. Maybe they have a headache, their heart's pounding. They're getting hives, they're breaking out in rashes all over, their stomach's upside down with butterflies, all of those things, right? Their body is trying to tell them, like, don't go on this, don't do it. And then there's people that are like, yeah, we can manage maybe some of that, but it's not as pleasant, not as exciting. The thing to remember is, like, one reaction is not right or wrong, right? Like, it is okay. I understand why some people love roller coasters. My kids love them. The bigger, the better. I also understand why for people that's not a great experience, right? Like, it's not natural to be doing upside down loops strapped to a piece of metal. Like, I understand why people's bodies would say hard pass. That's not going to happen. But I also want to throw in the idea of trauma to this. And there may be people that have had a trauma, a past trauma associated with roller coasters. So it could be anywhere from maybe, they went on one and just had a terrible experience. They felt incredibly ill after. They threw up, or they threw up on the roller coaster and it was super embarrassing. And they just, their body is like, will not allow them to go on a roller coaster again. Maybe they actually were involved in an incident or an accident related to a roller coaster where they were stuck on the roller coaster or were injured on a roller coaster. So we need to understand that there's different levels of stress response. And if someone has a past trauma, even related to a roller coaster or something else in the workplace or in their lives, we need to not judge them, and need to be supportive, right? Again, that might not be your lived experience, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen to them, and it doesn't mean it's wrong, right? We need to validate as opposed to just brushing things off. It's like when people say, when they're fearful of flying. We know the stats. They know the stats. They know that airplanes are generally very, very safe. And maybe you've flown lots of times and never had a bad experience. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter that you're not scared. Devaluing or not validating someone's experience or a past trauma is really detrimental, right? And it makes that person experience that stress. It's even harder, right? When they feel like they can't talk about it, that they're being judged, that they can't cope, and that there's something wrong with them, and all of those things. I'm just going to go to the chat for a second. Yeah, thanks, Holly. It goes back to being more considerate about other situations and our feelings. Yes, being more compassionate, or just understanding that, how you view the world is not the only way to view the world, and it's not everybody else's view of the world, right? There's lots of things. Maybe people like grew up in countries where there was war and there was bombing, and maybe hearing loud bangs, because we're talking about PTSD, like Tim mentioned, is real, and people can't control their responses at times. And just because that isn't your lived experience or you don't have that trauma history does not mean that's not valid. Person's body. Yes, choking. Yes, absolutely. You know what? I even know someone when we talk about a trauma response that was involved in a horrific accident, and their body like completely shut down, and not even gasping, choking, seizures. They actually developed type 1 diabetes because of that trauma, because our body does all sorts of things to try and protect us, right? When there's a perceived threat. And it's just amazing, what can happen and what is part of that trauma response. So again, be open-minded, be supportive. When it comes to the workplace, if you have someone on your team, like let's use public speaking as an example. Okay. I'm very comfortable public speaking. I could get up in front of 1,000 people. It is not a big deal to me. It does not cause me stress. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'm a little nervous before because I don't want to mess up or say the wrong thing, all of those things, but I really don't get stressed about it. But I know people that do. I have a friend, and if you told her she had to go up and speak in front of 10 people, that would be mortifying. Like she would flee. She would try to get out of that situation. Even, if her performance or a work performance was on the line, like she really has a very, very strong response to that perceived threat. If she has ambitions of being a public speaker, we can work on that, right? Like there's things we can do. We can create safe environments, maybe with friends or with practice, Toastmasters. Like there's things that we can do to help, with that stressor, different types of therapy, all of that. But what's important to recognize is just because I'm comfortable public speaking, I understand that that's not the same for everybody, right? And there's all sorts of different life experiences and things that we do every day, where we're like, yeah, it's easy, easy peasy. Even driving for some people, right? Some people have a very innate fear of driving. They can be a passenger, but they don't want to ever drive. And that's very, very scary and terrifying for them. Okay, like that is their fear. Like we need to work through that instead of diminishing it. So a trauma-informed approach to de-escalation. Okay, so this is huge. When there is people that have experienced past trauma, and when they are, triggered, or when there are things going on, we need to create a sense of safety. There has to be a safe person that they can talk to, understand that they may not be in control of their actions, right? They may be doing things, they may be reacting as opposed to responding. Their fight, flight, freeze responses is kicking in. Try not to dominate, right? Let them talk. Don't bark orders at them. Do not invade their personal space, right? Let them lead, let them, if they can express what they need. I like this low and slow kind of thing to remember, even if it's not because of a trauma informed approach, but if someone is agitated, low and slow, right? What that means is we want to talk with a lower tone in our voice and slow our speech down. I know when I get really animated and excited about something, or even if I perceive a threat, I can get louder and I can speak faster. That is not effective at de-escalation, right? People pick up on our energy and our tone of voice, and just really slowing it down, right? And lowering our tone of voice can be helpful to create calmness. Give them a sense of control. Choices. It's all about choices. You know, when I worked in healthcare, this was a huge part of our de-escalation training for nursing staff and other staff, was around giving patient as many choices as possible, because you often have people in situations where they feel like they have lost control or have no control or influence over the course of their day, how their life is going. And the more control we give people, instead of them feeling like things are happening to them, but they have involvement and influence over that, then it does create that sort of sense of, you know, that when they regain that control, it can help to de-escalate. So for example, if someone is agitated and they're escalating, asking them questions about, would you like to chat here, or do you want to go to a different space? Would you like a glass of water, right? Giving them, it seems small, but as many choices as you can give someone can help to de-escalate. We want to regulate over educate. Seek to understand. This is not a time to tell everybody why they're wrong and why you're right and let them know why they're wrong and why you're right. Like, it's not about educating. It's about validating. It's about seeking to understand, seeking clarity for what's going on, what their experience is. And this last bullet here around flip your lid, like, I love this. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Dan Siegel, but he has some amazing resources and YouTube videos. And I'm just sort of plugging him here, but this is his concept. So what the idea is we've got like two parts of our brain, right? So we have sort of our upstairs brain and downstairs brain. And this is Dan Siegel's words, not mine. So I'm not taking credit for this. But what happens is this is our primitive brain down here, right? And normally we have like our prefrontal cortex that's covering, this is our upstairs brain, our more evolved brain that is controlling some of those impulses in our primitive brain. So what happens is when people start to get agitated, right, or there's threats, right, and our fight, flight, freeze response is starting to kick in, these start to become less stable, our upstairs brain. And eventually, if there's so many threats firing, stressors, impulses into our downstairs brain, then we flip our lid, right, and we react, and we have no more of these sort of controlling factors that we normally have in place that help with emotional regulation. So a few things, right? Like being able to calm fear. This is happening in our prefrontal cortex and our upstairs brain. So having some reason and saying, no, like I understand that's scary, but I can manage this. I've done this before, right? Those reasoning abilities. Another piece of this upstairs brain is actually around response flexibility and understanding like, well, if I respond this way or if I do this, this is the outcome, right? And being able to run through those different scenarios and have different response flexibility. And also just like our autonomic nervous system, our fight, flight, freeze response, right? Having some control and not just reacting, right? But effectively responding. So I do suggest that like if this is something that's interesting to you, listen to Dr. Dan Siegel explain it, because it's better than the way I'm explaining it, but it is a really neat idea, right, of what happens. And when we try to rationalize with individuals when they flip their lid, why it's not making sense, because they've lost a lot of these aspects of that rational, controlled part of their brain, right? So we're dealing with the primitive part of their brain, and we need to respond a little bit differently. Okay, so flipping your lid. Look that up. It's awesome. I don't know if the links work, if everybody can click on those or not, but if not, we can put that link in the chat or give it to you afterwards. Oh, just so you know, like after every session, there is going to be like an email, and the resources that are provided will be sent out afterwards as well. So you'll be able to get those. Okay, so post-incident response, and I love when I read some of the things about what's your workplace doing for psychological safety, a lot of it was around this, right? Trauma response, peer support programs, debriefing, all of that is so important. And you know, it's important to remember that if there has been an incident, and whether it is sort of conflict in the workplace, maybe someone has responded to a perceived threat, maybe they've had a panic attack, an anxiety attack, maybe there's been an incident where someone sort of, you know, went off the handle a little bit and reacted and had some behaviors that they're not proud of or actually ashamed of or embarrassed. Um, we need to do that sort of post-incident response after and let people know that we're seeking to understand, we're seeking, to help and support them in a way that works for them. So when I say offer meaningful supports, that doesn't mean just give everybody an employee and family assistance program card, or you know what I mean? Like, that isn't going to work for everybody. Just on that for a second, and this is nothing against EFAP, and I'm sure a lot of you have those programs and they are good and you should have them, and that's fine. But just know that it's not going to meet everybody's needs. There are a lot of people that will never reach out to EFAP because they don't believe it's private and confidential because it's employer funded. There's some people that have maybe reached out to EFAP in the past and it didn't meet their needs. They didn't get the help and support that they needed. So again, just make sure there's other options besides EFAP. And then really normalize this help seeking behavior, right? Like, let people know that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say when you're not okay. Like, we may not have all the answers, but we care, we're here, we can listen. So some of the tools and resources that we've got up here. Yeah, I agree. It's a band-aid solution. I'm just reading the chat right now. If the workplace continues to induce trauma, that's right. So when we seek to understand, we actually want to know and we want to understand what causes that reaction and that response. Because maybe it is simple, right? Maybe there are some things or some interactions or some people that are causing that response, and giving someone an EFAP card doesn't really deal with the root cause, right? Which might be avoidable. Okay. Um, Okay, so we've got some different tools here. So WSPS, we have a workplace violence and harassment toolbox. We have a training course called situational awareness and de-escalation training. Oh, and this mental harm prevention roadmap is fantastic. If any organization is looking to either, figure out where they're at in their psychological health and safety journey or get started, that resource is fantastic. So essentially what it does is it breaks psychological health and safety, like the management system, into 8 different building blocks. And it allows organizations to go and do a bit of a self-assessment and then get some sort of start here ideas with some tools and resources like sample policies, things like that. So it's kind of a nice tool if you're looking to get started on this journey. Certainly go check that out. It's all free. Anyway, just a little plug for that. Workplace Strategies for Mental Health is a fantastic resource as well. Everything is free on there. It has different workshops. It really lends the content from the CSA standard that I touched on earlier, and has different information on all of the different workplace factors that can contribute to mental harm. There is a resource on that website as well around managing trauma at work. So again, some really, really good stuff. I have put the link to Dr. Dan Siegel, and then CMHA it has their workplace mental health site that has, the Not Myself Today campaign, things like that. I also just want to mention that in case you're not aware, if you do have sort of a mental health resource list at your workplace, 988 is now the sort of crisis line for suicide prevention. So you can make that known in your organizations that if anyone is having suicidal thoughts or ideations or supporting someone that they're worried is, at risk of harming themselves, that is a resource that is now available across Canada. So that brings me to the end of the formal part of this presentation. I think I got to most of the questions that were in the chat, but if you have any other questions, you can feel free to put them in there. We have a few more minutes. Otherwise, I completely understand if you've got a lot to get to today, or your tummy's rumbling and you need to go get some lunch. I really appreciate everybody showing up today. I hope you found the information helpful. Yes, thank you, Paula, 988 caller text. Absolutely. I hope you found the information helpful and benefited from it. But yeah, start of a conversation, get people thinking. Appreciated the participation in the polls, and I know you're all there. Sometimes it feels like I'm just talking in cyberspace, but I knew people were listening because of people chiming in. So thank you. And stay tuned. The recorded version will be available if you want to share it with anybody. I saw a hand up, but again, if you have a question, go ahead. And I saw there was someone else named Christy on the chat and it was spelled the same. So high five to you, Christy. I know you're out there somewhere. All right. Okay. Take care, everyone. If you have questions, I will stick around. Have a great day. Oh, maybe I'll just stick my email address for those of you that are still here. I will put my email address in the chat if you want to reach out anytime or need resources. Oh, shift rotations. That's such a good question. Yes, Carolyn, I have looked up some information. If you can email me, I just gave that in my email address right there. So send me an email and I will send you what I've got, because I did work with an organization that was looking at sort of justifying different shift rotations because of mental health concerns. So please reach out and we'll see what we can get you. Okay. Yeah. So Holly, if you can send me an email too, then I'll have your email address. I can help you out. I don't know if you're still on, but like one of the big concerns around shift work and like shift rotations and lengths of shift is actually more part of the impairment conversation, and how fatigue and sleep deprivation can cause impairment like symptoms and safety concerns in the workplace. So that's a big factor as well. And there has been studies related to that, and whether it's like, I know this is getting a little technical, but like whether your shift rotation moves forward, like midnights, days, afternoons, as opposed to like afternoons, days, midnights, actually is better for sleep and reducing the risk of sleep deprivation and impairment like symptoms. So, and it's, you know, different things like that to consider. Maybe a few more minutes. I see there's still almost 20 people on the call. Okay, thanks everyone.